It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and Odo is preparing coffee. Not for him, but for Kira, as she arrives shortly after to go over a security report. It's mostly basic stuff, save for a guy scrawling political propaganda on a wall. Shaka, former resistance fighter turned First Minister of Bajor, will be visiting the station shortly, and some people aren't happy that he's pushing for Federation membership. That'll have to wait, as Quark's here to complain about Odo. His quarters are above Quark's, and Odo's shapeshifting is not always quiet. For somebody whose head is 25% ears, living below a guy who can turn into various forms of wildlife is far from delightful. After Quark's buggered off, Odo implies to Kira that his choice of room was not random. It's a formal greeting for Shaka when he arrives, despite he and Kira being on first-name terms. Well, second-name terms. He is the First Minister now, after all, complete with assistant, and that means having to put up with things like giving speeches. It also means having to put up with things like the death threat Odo just heard about. He gives the speech anyway, much to Odo's displeasure, but the assistant says this is business as usual for Shaka. Okay, a threat from Cardigan extremists is a bit more serious than normal, even before you consider that they've already murderized some Bajoran politicians, but that won't change anything. Shaka will want to hold these Federation talks regardless of the threat. That means extra security, and Eddington's not in this episode, so Worf's put in charge of coordinating Starfleet guards with Odo. Or trying to, anyway. Shaka suddenly deciding to visit the temple here means scrambling to try and move people. It does give them the chance for their first proper chat, though, and Shaka mentions Kira, saying how much she trusts Odo, which is good enough for him. Trust alone, though, might not be enough if he's going to keep putting himself in the middle of groups. Some of that can't be avoided, like the formal reception we're holding, but at least that's a controlled environment. Not that Odo's letting his guard down, as Kira notes to him. She also mentions his change of wardrobe since the start of Season 4 and says she misses the belt, so he brings it back to please her. Seeing her try to leave for the night makes Shaka excuse himself from his current group and intercept her. He wants a break from all of this formal shit and decides a stroll with Kira will do it. That's another security headache for Odo, so he comes along as an escort, albeit with some distance after Shaka asks him to hang back. The whole thing is watched by Quark, who's been providing refreshments, and who it seems has just realized Shaka didn't simply want to stroll, and Odo didn't simply want to guard Shaka. The negotiations continue, though not well. Odo can tell Shaka is struggling through his body language as we escort him to his quarters, and we learn it's because the Federation is unwilling to shorten their admission timescale to suit Bajor. Odo seems to agree with Shaka, as Bajor is a complicated case, a position that has Shaka inviting Odo in for a chat. It starts awkwardly and gets worse. Shaka's asking about Kira and if she talks about him. See, he's developing emotions for her and wants to know if there's any hint it might be reciprocal. Odo reminding him it's less than a year since she watched her last partner get turned into a cyborg and cark it is a fair point, though perhaps one also pitched to dissuade him. He stays otherwise impartial and simply sits and listens to a man saying he wants the woman Odo loves. He's in a shitty mood then later when he catches Quark trying to spy on proceedings with a bug. Quark understands why and tells Odo, not unkindly, that he's figured out the reason. Odo's in no mood for comfort from anybody, least of all Quark, and unconvincingly denies it before leaving. Kira being late for her weekly security meeting doesn't help either, and nor does her immediately bailing so she can give Shaka a tour of the station. Odo is an escort again, though perhaps less for security this time, as his presence just coincidentally prevents Kira and Shaka from kissing. The tour continues via a lift, and Odo being trapped in a small room while they make plans for the evening is difficult for him. Worf calls to say the lift needs to be diverted, and after asking him for his security clearance, Odo turns over control. That's either a mistake or a massive coincidence as the lift begins to freefall, which started me wondering why they'd have artificial gravity in a lift shaft rather than just the cars themselves, but let's ignore that for now. Odo solves the problem by turning his arms into rams that bend the body of the lift they're in, stopping it through friction against the shaft. Somebody being able to mimic Worf's voice on our phone system and override the safety features of a lift is not good news for Sisko. Even more concerning to him is Odo's admission that he didn't actually wait until receiving security codes before handing over control, though Odo doesn't want to tell him it's because he was distracted by Kira and Shaka making dinner plans. Instead, Odo tells him he won't fuck up again, and Sisko lets it go, but follows up by making it clear he expects whoever did this to be caught quickly. Worf's had a poke around and found out how our extremists tried to kill Shaka. There might also be a way of tracking the culprit using the data, but Odo is still distracted, despite his word to Sisko. He bristles when Worf points out that his mind isn't on the job and decides to go and talk to Kira. He arrives to find guards on her door, the ones assigned to Shaka. Odo dismisses one of them and waits there himself, until morning. Eventually the door opens and disgorges Shaka into the corridor with a grinning Kira behind him. He leaves and Odo goes into Kira's quarters, his stated reason being to ask about the lift incident. Instead, him seeing the candle-lit table with a booze bucket on has her talking about Shaka, more specifically, her and Shaka. And so, out of the blue as well, she didn't see it coming at all, but she's glad Odo found out about it first. You know, what with him being such a good friend. He leaves without asking the questions he used as an excuse and goes back to his office. If he was looking for solace, he's out of luck. Worf's found the guy who tried to kill Shaka and interrupted him having another go to boot. He's already confessed, in fact. Worf didn't bother calling Odo because he wasn't needed. Odo has nothing left to do except go back to his quarters and beat the ever-loving shit out of the entire room. That prompts another visit from Quark to complain about the noise. Odo doesn't answer, but a lock is nothing to Quark. He stops trying to berate Odo when Quark sees the state he's in, and Odo admits that he was right about Kira. That has Quark make the connections on his own and assume correctly that she and Shaka are not simply friends anymore. That's bad news, says Quark, not in and of itself, as he has no interest in who goes dirty little bastard mode with who, but because it's interrupting his sweepstakes, the one he holds with his patrons whenever there's a weird crime on the station, the one about how long it'll take Odo to catch whoever did it, because he's so reliable. As far as Quark's concerned, the only way that sweepstake has a future is if Odo either tells Kira how he feels, or focuses on himself for a while. Odo's paying a visit to Kira. He's here to tell her that their weekly security meetings will have to be postponed in favour of training his deputies. She's disappointed, as she thought he enjoyed them as much as she did, but understands he's trying to be more efficient. That's why he's not bothering with the belt, either. He visits Quark's later on his rounds and is told Shaka and Kira are in a holosuite together, practicing a speech, apparently, maybe something to do with the rumour Quark heard about the Federation agreeing to change their membership timetable. Oh, and there was some more noise from Odo's room this morning, so Quark went to complain. Imagine his surprise to find Odo wasn't there and some engineers were installing soundproofing in the floor. Odo corrects him and says it's being reinforced. That it benefits somebody else is pure coincidence, just like the talk about Quark's sweepstake on Odo. Kira and Shaka coming downstairs prompts Odo to depart, so we'll leave him to focus on the essentials until the next adventure. Oh, Odo. Much more of this, and O'Brien's going to have to start sharing the title of Must Suffer with you. Not that a Kira and Shaka pairing was entirely unexpected for we viewers, of course. We were there last season when the groundwork was laid. Shaka saying "we've all missed you, especially me" in his titular episode was just the most overt of it all. I complained at the time about the lack of subtlety, with Kira literally extinguishing the torch she carried for Burial at the end of the episode. Still, it is what it is. Kira's with somebody again after a suitably appropriate year of mourning, and Odo's decision to give her space has bitten him on the arse. All the more galling for him, perhaps, is hearing Shaka mirror all of his own beliefs about Kira back at him during the awkward conversation in Shaka's quarters. It's a well-played scene, Shaka stating thoughts about he and Kira that Odo's already had countless times himself. For Odo to then learn that him waiting was perhaps the wrong decision is a wound for multiple reasons. There's the obvious one of realizing that your own good intentions have screwed you, but for Odo that would be coupled by further intensifying his doubts about ever understanding humanoids, or Kira to be specific. To believe you're doing the right thing by someone and then realize you were mistaken is bad enough. For it to perhaps be indicative of a greater lack of comprehension is even worse. Again, those comparisons to we people with spicy brains are evident here, Odo's confusion with humanoids mirroring our confusion with neurotypicals. Help for him comes from the most expected of unexpected places, his casual nemesis. The advice Quark gives here is the same as I've personally given to people experiencing a breakup: disengage as much as you can and focus on yourself. It sounds vaguely egotistical on the surface, but it's preferable to the alternative. There's only so much you can absorb before bitterness and resentment start to make their way to the surface, and that's no good for anybody involved. Far better to remove yourself from the situation and take care of your own mental health. As lessons go, it's not one I'd recommend learning the hard way. That advice is couched in the manner of Quark protecting his profit line, of course, but that's his way, just as Odo installing soundproofing comes with an excuse. They play the game and sometimes fall out over the rules, but there's nobody they'd rather have as a long-term opponent. The obvious isn't said because it doesn't need to be, and Quark's deliberate mocking of Odo doing something nice for him is part of that game, an enjoyment of prodding Odo's discomfort. When the tables are turned and Odo accuses him of trying to be a friend, Quark joins in with the denial because it's what Odo needed to hear at that point. As we said on the channel before, to believe that Quark values nothing but money is to vastly underestimate the character. Elsewhere in the episode we had a chat between Odo and Worf about preferring order and wanting to be left the fuck alone, complete with tips on keeping people away. Did it feel forced and wooden? Well, yes, but at least it's an effort to try and make Worf fit in somewhere on the station. Outside of his own dedicated storylines, Worf's not had a lot going on, so a little interaction here and there is a good thing. You could even argue the awkward nature of their conversation is a reflection of their personalities, if you wanted to be generous. Overall, I think it's a case of something being better than nothing. We're essentially relaunching the character of Worf into a show that's been running for years, so a little bit of a shaky start is understandable. Also in this episode is our second mention of a Cardigan extremist group called The True Way. It's a reminder that, although the current political unpleasantness there might be settling a little, things are far from peaceful. Whether that's caused by the current Klingon threat, or agitation by founder infiltrators, or just people who are still pissed off at the Bajoran withdrawal is left up to us to decide. Deep Space Nine has certainly given us plenty of options. Finally, let's touch on Bajor applying for Federation membership, shall we? We've had mentions that Bajor's application was in the works before, but I think this is the first formal diplomatic discussion of the matter we've seen. Not only that, but it also raises a few questions about the process. Shaka implies the application timetable is a rigid structure, presumably to ensure every member feels like they've been equally treated. It's not that simple, though, as we touch upon in the story. Bajor is a post-occupation society trying to rebuild itself, something that provides a number of unique challenges. They're not merely logistical either, a simple matter of being on an equal footing with other members, but also psychological. Despite Shaka's insistence on accelerating the timetable, how might a swift entry into what some may see as another empire in all but name be received by those who lived through the occupation? And how can the Federation be sure it's what the people want rather than a rush job by their representatives? Might then that timetable be as much for the applicant as the Federation, an assurance that the desire to join is genuine rather than a passing fad from those in power? Might there in fact be an argument made for a society needing to have been self-governing and politically stable for a number of years before application is even considered? Like so many other things on the show, it's a complicated situation with no clear right answer. If there's one thing DS9 gets consistently right, it's how messy and convoluted the whole process of politics can become, and in a very short time indeed. End of episode.
Are you sure this is gonna work?
No, but Starfleet tech has a tendency to do time travel if you even fart at it, so I think there's a high probability.
Yeah, fair point. So we go back to when Ordinator made the threat, but before you go and kick him in the dick. Then we can play out that storyline, and the guy who writes these doesn't have to think of another one.
Thank the gods for that. We've already done holograms and time shenanigans. I'd hate to see what he thinks up next.
Alright then, lad, let's get this done. Energize and all that shite.
Oh.
People of Deep Space Nine. I am here to tell you that your station will be destroyed if you do not surrender your supply of potato-based snacks.
Oh, thank fuck for that. Woof. Right then, past computer, don't go and... Hold on a minute, where are we?
I don't know. I aimed for the credit skit from episode 9, and I'm sure I heard them talking on the way in.
Well, we're clearly not there, are we? So, what happened?
Perhaps we're waiting to materialize?
No, we've been stored in buffer before, remember, and this feels different.
That's the credit skit for Season 4, Episode 7 of Voyager, if you're new here.
Okay, so if we're not in the teleport buffer, then that means... Oh shit.
What?
We missed it.
Missed what?
The clip of the other skit. We overshot it. We're literally off the timeline.
Oh, woof.